Jams, jams, jams. Picture books and jams. Welcome, everybody, to PBJamz. Music and picture books, what a perfect sandwich. Squish them all together, what a yummy.
So another question that was brought up was, so how do I use picture books more effectively in my classroom? So who would like to weigh in on that one?
Picture
I
books.
think-
And
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Jolene.
Well, I just wanted to clarify, picture books tied to music or just picture books in general?
The question just says picture books in general. So, I mean, I think the two questions were two parts of the same. And so it was like, how do I use music better and how do I use picture books better?
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I use picture books always for all of my classes. And even with my high school kids, like picture books are an amazing way to kickstart a unit. Or, I mean, I mentioned music kind of grounding us in a topic. Picture books do the same thing. They ground you in this topic. You better understand, okay, this is what I'm dealing with. And oftentimes, especially with what I teach, if I'm teaching history or a picture book biography or some kind of a social justice topic, we get this story through the lens of a main character. So my kids are instantly more invested and they feel it more than just reading from a textbook a lot of times. So I picture books are for everyone. And just like with music, kind of getting the warm, fuzzy feeling, giving us all this warm, fuzzy feeling and tying back to that memory of childhood, picture books do that too. If kids were read to when they were young, I see my high school kids come into my library and go to the picture book section and say, oh my God, I remember this one. I can't believe you had this, like that you have Goodnight Moon or,
Right.
The Hungry Caterpillar or whatever it is that they're connecting with because they tap back into those warm, fuzzy feelings. And so it's just an instant hook. And we do see the other side of this, sometimes these harder kids, because we're seeing the childhood heart, like that's them. And then we can tap in. So even my oldest kids love to be read to if they were read to when they were young. And they'll just settle in and hear this story and connect. I love them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and we know now too that storytelling is the way we retain information more. So that's a great point, using a picture book to introduce a topic, it's going to go in deeper and then learning about it always. And there's nothing like being read to. There is nothing like it.
Again, that relationship. I keep hearing us circling back to that, relationship.
It's relationships.
Yeah. And as teachers, like we know that's how we reach our kids, right? Like that's how we reach the Marquises and the whoever else is, right? But the easy ones are easy and you can reach them lots of different ways. But those kids like Marquise and so many others that I've had through the years, story and music, those are two of the ways that you can break through some of the harder cases that you have to deal with, and it softens them and it builds that relationship so that they know you care about them and they begin to care about you as well, and then they want to please you, and then they want to do well because you believe in them and because you've offered this relationship with them. Great points. Yeah.
And
for English
picture books really go ahead.
Sorry, you want to, continue that thought because mine is a little different. So
I was just going to say,
Nancy.
picture books make learning so inviting. There's nothing threatening or scary or intimidating about it. You just bring yourself and you're there. So you're not like, your brain doesn't say, oh, I'm learning this information, I don't know if I can do it. It's so inviting. So
I was thinking about picture books in relation to English for speakers of other languages, because that art, you can read the art as well, and it's really helpful. And I just got this book from the library recently, Lindsay Bonilla. I don't know if it's Bonilla or Bonilla.
It is
Bonilla. Okay. And Mark Hoffman's book, The Note Who Faced the Music. But I think it's also really fun to use books with English as a second language speakers, if
Yes.
you want to teach some idiomatic expressions like face the
Yes.
music, or that rings a bell, or, you know, whatever the other, and I had fun with that in clarinet and trumpet as well. But there's a whole bunch of them in here that are fun for kids to discover, and kids to, you know, just to learn those phrases that have those metaphorical meanings as well as the literal ones.
Yeah, that book reminded me a lot of yours. I featured it as well. Lindsay met with me on PBJamz too, so that's an episode. And I love both of your books because of that, because it does introduce a lot of those idiomatic expressions. That was actually one of the questions, or kind of a subset that was brought up, was using picture books, call and response, idiomatic expressions, onomatopoeia. Which, by the way, Nancy, you were talking about remembering how to spell encyclopedia because,
Yes.
yeah. So Jack Hartman, you know, has
Yeah.
a song, How to Spell Onomatopoeia. So if you
Yes.
struggle, like most of us struggle with onomatopoeia, or your kids struggle, I don't know if they're ever actually trying to write onomatopoeia, but if they are, then there is a Jack Hartman song for that. I think there's a
Oh,
Jack
that's so good to
song
know.
for everything. But that's I know it now. I can spell it. Thank you, Jack Hartman. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was just a
I'm
couple
gonna have to
years
look that
ago.
up because
Yeah.
I struggle with that every time.
Yes, it's always fail. But yeah, I think that's one of the beauties of picture books, is that richness of language. And you do get a lot of those idiomatic expressions. You do get a lot of the onomatopoeia, you know, and oftentimes there is a refrain. So even if it's not a book about music, somebody mentioned this earlier, that there's a cadence and a rhythm. And even if it's not written in rhyme, a lot of us do write in very lyrical ways. Lydia Lukitas, the book Deep, Deep Down, is not written in rhyme, but it's very lyrical, and it does kind of have that rhythmic feel to it, which really helps kids with fluency. Reika and Nancy, I think both of you mentioned fluency, which I think is huge. I think it's a fabulous reason to use picture books. For one thing, they invite being read over and over again, and that
Yes.
repetition is what builds the fluency. But also, going back to the earlier question about using music in the classroom, like when I'm working on programs and things, the kids are seeing the lyrics on the screen, you know, and they're connecting that with the language. And I'm watching all the time to see how the kids are connecting those, and the ones that are like reading ahead, you know, but just building that fluency, putting the music to the lyrics just really helps him to start to feel how the language flows, as opposed to the dog ate my homework, you know.
Right.
The repetition, the rhythm, those are all super important things. So that call and response is another thing I think that really helps build fluency. You know, when I say it to you and you see it and you say it back to me, and you've got those supports in place, you know, that you don't feel like you're out on a limb, and it's okay if you know, you're not going to mess up because she's saying it for you, you know, and you're just saying it back. So,
You know, Tani, I want to add to that because it's just making me think about my 80s childhood and the books on tape in the
oh
plastic
yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
bag with the white hangers, and the picture book was in there with a little cassette. And
Yes.
I would spend hours
Yes.
listening to these,
Uh-huh.
hours, my brother and I. And I honestly think it started my career as an actress because I would then go home and record my own ones and force my producers
Oh,
to listen to
yeah.
them. And now when you hear the ding, you have to turn the page, and the poor child is
Right.
subjected to all of this. But we have an aptitude of resources now for this. If you think about the ways in which it's not a plastic bag, I still love it. I
Right.
mean, if I could find one somewhere, I would probably buy it just for the nostalgia of it all. But from that to now what we have, and I really fight and I'm troubled by how my three kiddos have iPads in school. I get it, whatever, but I'm like, can't they just give you a worksheet so I can see what
Uh-huh.
you're doing? Because if
Uh-huh.
it's submitted, whatever. But if we tap into the benefit of that technology, it's that kids can have books read to them and they can hear the fluency. And I was really fortunate with the music board book series that I was able to do all the audio narration. I was prepping back in the 80s, I guess.
Uh-huh.
And then I was able to do the musical instrumentation. My kids were able to come into the studio and record music and all of that. And so that experience, when we listen to it, it transcends really just, I really, I'll never get away from holding a book and reading it, but that
Mhm.
oral aesthetic experience of hearing how the instruments sound is for me as an educator, an
Mhm.
accessibility piece for a child that might never see a djembe in front of them,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
right? So I think we've come leaps and bounds from where we were to being able to read aloud to each other, what that experience is, the books on tapes, all of that, even just the earliest ebooks. I'm really thrilled with where publishing has gone
Mhm.
to help children, because I think we have to also recognize that being able to discern different pitches and sounds and instruments is a skill that we teach. You
Mhm.
don't just, you're not born knowing the difference between a guitar and a
Mhm.
trumpet. We as musicians have trained ears. And so
Mhm.
that's where books, I think, are an entry point as well. That's where this piece of, having music and books connect is that piece as well. Sure, you can look at all these instruments around the world in a book, but if you can't hold one or play one or hear what it
Or
sounds
hear
like,
it. Yeah.
we're missing that piece too. And so I really love that. I really see that we're going in a really nice place from me recording these little books out loud
Mhm.
in my bedroom.
Yeah.
One
It's
of the
great.
resources on my Sing with Our Kids website, I've got a page on books that sing. And when I started researching to put together a collection, it's so overwhelming. There are countless. And so to make it more tangible almost for people, I divided it into 4 categories. So I have lists of books based on traditional songs, books based on original songs. These all have, and then books with a song and a story, like Pete the Cat, where you have the song that's repeated. And then what I call books with a beat. And we were talking about that, like Beep and Bop or Tinka Tinka Skunk, where, because rhythm really is the foundation of music. It's where it all begins, and it's not separate from it. But a lot of people who aren't comfortable singing, if they know, they can pick up a book that's just fun to read, and you can use your voice and just keep that rhythm going. So by putting those 4 categories on, when I do workshops, I present samples of each one of them, and people are drawn to different things. And I tell adults, if you had a favorite song, it's probably been turned into a picture book. And my personal opinion is a lot of them shouldn't have been, but they are. And so you see these adult songs that now 3-year-olds are loving because an adult is sitting there and singing it with them and turning the pages and looking at the pictures. So it's such a great resource, and there's so many of them. But they're hard to find because most libraries, they're just in amongst the picture books. Our King County libraries have them actually shelved separately, different color coded. So that is great. And same thing in bookstores, they're hard to find. So that's why I created the lists, which of course, which need to be updated, of course, all the time with many of your books.
All the time. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
growing all the time. Yeah, in fact, somebody contacted me this week and they've just done it's just coming out later in February, I think, or maybe March. It's Miss McDonald. Miss McDonald had a farm, and hers focuses on the plants and the plant life cycle. But
Uh-huh.
you've got Old McDonald had a band. There's that version, and I mean, there's so many
Had a
those
tool shop, had a fill in the
yeah,
blank. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
they provide such a nice
Yep.
foundational structure, and then you can just kind of go off and you can introduce all kinds of things. My piano that Jennifer Jasinski released this past year is built on the house that Jack built.
Uh-huh.
If you guys have not read that book, like especially those of you that do play piano, you really need to read that book. It is the most amazing. I'm still blown away by it because she rhymes. It's built on the structure of the house that Jack built. She talks about all the intricate parts of the piano, and it is dealing with the SEL topic of like stage fright and nerves and how to push through that. I'm still absolutely blown away that she accomplished all of that in that book. It's absolutely astounding. I love, and
What's the title of it?
it's called My Piano.
Okay.
Jennifer Jasinski is the author. Just lovely. It's lovely. But those again, that format. It's similar to, the fractured fairy tales. We write the fractured fairy tales and we have that foundation, and then you just play with it and you just go all kinds of different directions. I mean, Tango Red Riding Hood I featured recently, which it works a lot of ESL, a lot of Spanish, it's bilingual, a lot of Spanish language in there, Argentine, she says Argentine, Argentine culture. I've always thought Argentine, but she says Argentine. So, and she should know, she has the background. So, like so many just amazing things that people do when you have just that little bit of foundation. And I think that's another, one of my favorite books to use in the classroom when I was in the regular, and actually I've used it in the music classroom too, is it's a Dr. Seuss book. Oh, I can't remember right now. I wish I had duck feet. I wish I had duck feet. And do you guys know that book?
I don't know that one.
It is so fun because it's this little boy and he keeps talking about all these different animal characteristics that he wishes he had. And it's like, I wish I had duck feet. If I did, then I could. But also, if I did, this would be the bad consequence. So I guess I won't have duck feet. And then it goes to the next thing. I wish I had a whale spout because then I could, but then also, so I guess not. And so by the end of the book, the kid determines that, well, dang, I guess I'll just be me, which is just a fabulous message. But that structure is so fun to have kids do their own writing. And so we made class books, and it would be, okay, you do, these 4 parts. I wish I had. Here would be the good thing. Here would be the bad thing. And so I guess I will or I won't. And so it was just such a fun, again, providing that foundation for kids to kind of latch onto, and just so fun. Fun. Okay. So another question that came in was talking about the nonfiction picture books. And Jolene, you've already alluded to this some, and that connection to curriculum, and specifically talking about finding inspiration from picture book biographies about various musicians. So let me start off this part of the conversation by saying PBJamz inspired me this year to rearrange my whole curriculum, which I do every year. I never teach the same way twice because I get bored. But so this year, I always have a theme. And so my theme this year is musical superheroes. And so I have superhero stuff all over my room, right? But we're tackling musical superheroes. So people that have used music to change the world. And so far, it was spurred on by a lot of the PBJamz bios. Julie Headlam with Song After Song about Julie Andrews. So we learned about Julie Andrews. Robin McGrath's Dolly, Big Dream. So we've learned about Dolly Parton. We've learned about Rosetta Tharpe, the godmother of rock and roll, with Charnel Pinckney Barlow, and that little Rosetta and the Talking Guitar, Little Rosetta and the Talking Guitar. We have talked about this week. We're learning about John Cage. Go figure. And can I just tell you, Lisa Rogers has a fabulous, it's called Beautiful Noise. It's so beautiful. It's been nominated for some awards. It's so gorgeous. And she is, I never would have thought that anybody could take John Cage and make him accessible for elementary students, but y'all, she did. And my kids are loving it. They're loving learning about John Cage, and that the way she structured the text to say, if you did this, then you'd be like John Cage. And it's just this little repetitive refrain. By the time you get to the 3rd spread, they go, John Cage. They're not going to forget his name anytime soon. Yeah. And then you're able to introduce this really bizarre music. I mean, he had such imagination with how he thought about music, and you're making that accessible to them. And then I went to a Stomp performance. Do you guys know Stomp? Are you familiar with the musical?
Yeah.
So yeah, Stomp. My husband and I went to a performance of Stomp, and I'm sitting there thinking, holy cow, this was what John Cage allowed us to do. Like, this probably would never even have been a thing had it not been for John Cage and his mixers and washing machines and bathtubs on stage. You know, like this was the precursor. And so that's what I mean, that's inspired me. So next week I'm going to give them a bunch of crazy stuff and say, make music. I mean, for real, like just here.
Yeah.
Here's a box for this group. Here's a box, and I've got rubber bands, and I've got different kinds of mallets in there, and boxes, and things that you can scrape, and none of them. I mean, maybe a few real instruments. You know, Reka, right? Like all kinds of music. So
Well,
there,
I was gonna say, a local music teacher here when I was in her school doing Can You Dance Like a Peacock and then doing some of the music books, told me that when she took over for the previous music teacher who was there for 25 years,
Yep.
barely had any like, enriched curriculum, she's like, I need some instruments. So she went to Home Depot and set up a music teacher and got like 20 of their orange buckets. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's like,
Great.
I know, like who doesn't drum on a bucket or on a floor? Like that's exactly what all of this is. It's amazing. Tanya, I have to just add to what you're saying with the musical picture book biographies and the nonfiction. One of the things that I've seen is we want more of those books in our classrooms. But from the publishing side, I've experienced such a pushback because publishers say that the market is saturated with this person or that person. We've already got the story of whoever and this whatever. But I've always been drawn to, and I don't know if I've even shared this with you, but I've always been drawn to Ella Fitzgerald and Louis Armstrong, who I recently, from writing this book, found out only liked to be called Louis. But he thought but Louis was the French appropriation of his name. And so like 3 or 4 years ago, I decided I wanted to veer from this traditional, they're born, they did this and this and this, and here they are, and they made an impact, and talk about how as musicians, we create things together, which a lot of these biographies don't address. And I joke about it too, because especially during COVID, I would always say, well, us musicians were prepared for isolation because, we spent hours in the music room by ourselves. It didn't really affect us to shut the door and sit alone for 5 days. It was kind of what we were trained to do. But the heart of it is music is a social experience. When we come out of that music room, it's the response from the audience, whoever. So I'll tell you all, and I can share it now. It was years of pushback and rejection about this biography of these two incredible musicians and how they collaborated ultimately together to change how we know jazz music, because we know everything about Ella Fitzgerald and we know everything about Louis Armstrong, except that he liked to be called Louis, which nobody ever addresses, right? So there's all of this, and the announcement hasn't come out yet, but everything is final. It's probably going to come out next week. That book is coming out next year, and the point of it for me is, though, their voices, their stories are in everybody's music curriculum. They are, when we talk about jazz history, when we talk about African American Black history, we talk about it, but we don't understand the nuances of what these musicians did. It's not just she was born, she was raised, she struggled, she sang. There are nuances to what we do, right? And I think a lot of this nonfiction biographies leave those details out. The importance of how we make music together. And so I, for myself, was thrilled when that finally happened. I'm like, wow, 3 years in the making, but let's never give up.
That's fantastic. That's just fantastic.
Well, the other piece is, and I really, the message for readers is, we make music alone, but what is that shared experience of music, right? And I think that we lose a lot with the biographies. And I hope that, my hope is whatever biographies we're reading and writing about show that shared experience of how we all came to be who we are, right? If I were to ask any of you to write your autobiography, we're going to have a list of people who, and places and experiences who helped us get there. And sometimes the linear becomes the focus and we're not seeing the shared experience. So I just had to add to that when you were talking about that nonfiction biography piece. I wish we had more of it and more of those enriched experiences.
Well, and I love how creative those books have gotten too. Like I was saying about Lisa's book, like the structure of that book was so perfect. And
Yeah.
I think when we land on that, really for the writers who are watching, like when you land on that perfect structure, My Piano, like, oh my goodness, like the whole book just literally sings. I mean, I know we're talking about, musical books here, but I mean, literally those books just sing. And I can tell you, from a classroom experience too, teaching music, I see 36 classes a week, right? And oftentimes when I can, I try to keep everybody on the same thing because it makes my life a little bit easier. And so I'm reading sometimes that picture book 36 times, right? And even building an orchestra of hope, last year I did stations in the classroom. So I read that book 4 times in every class, but I only did it like for one grade level. So, but still I was reading it 4 times for every class. So when you do it that way, like, the ones that are really awesome read alouds, because you're not sick of them by the time you get to Friday or whenever you're done, right? And so those are, I mean, Building an Orchestra of Hope is beautifully written. I'm not tired of it after reading it 37 times. And My Piano, and those are the books that are really, really well written. And I love that the picture book biographies have moved away from, like you were saying, Reka, just that linear kind of boom, from beginning to end, but they're just pulling out this one, like Little Rosetta, it just pulled out that guitar and how she acquired her guitar knowledge. And so it's not everything, but it is about how her community, the sounds that she heard, and then she's trying to emulate those on her guitar. Like everybody in her neighborhood influenced her. And so she's using the sewing machine sounds from, her neighbor. And so all those people are mentioned as part of the contributory, part of Little Rosetta's story. And so I do think that's
PB